God bless you, and welcome to another week of God at Work. And this week here, we're going on a journey to Russia, Siberia, Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, Belarus, several of the ex-Soviet countries. And I hope you'll enjoy the time there. We had, what we're doing today is actually several different trips. Couple of them, one group of friends were with me, and another group of friends were with me. But really interesting time, and met some lovely people, and you'll see some interesting adventures along the way. So we're looking forward to it. And for this one here, Jerry's going to start out with a song that's very appropriate for this trip. It's called "He Leadeth Me," and there were several places along this journey that, if he wasn't leading, we would never have made it, as in all of them, but this one here is very obvious. So, Jerry, go ahead. He leadeth me.
He leadeth me, O blessed thought, O words with heavenly comfort fraught. Whate'er I do, where'er I be, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. Sometimes mid scenes of deepest gloom, sometimes where Eden's bowers bloom, by water still or troubled sea, still 'tis his hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful follower I will be, for by his hand he leadeth me. Lord, I would clasp thy hand in mine, nor ever murmur nor repine, content whatever lot I see, since 'tis my God that leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful follower I will be, for by his hand he leadeth me. And when my task on earth is done, when by thy grace the victory's won, even death's cold wave I will not flee, since God through Jordan leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful follower I will be, for by his hand he leadeth me. He leadeth me, by his own hand he leadeth me. His faithful follower I will be, for by his hand he leadeth me. For by his hand he leadeth me.
Well, let's pray as we get started today and thank God for his leading and his guiding each step along the way. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are leading and guiding us, Father, each step, each song sung, each word spoken, Lord, that you lead us and guide us. And we are so thankful for your leading, Lord, knowing that without you, we can do nothing. Without you, there's nothing that will come of any avail, Lord, in all that we step forth to do without you. So, Lord, have your perfect will now, and you, as every word spoken and every song sung, Lord, is committed to you. In Jesus' precious name, amen. Amen. Now, I want to start off this particular trip. Pastor Hector Jimenez from Argentina and I were heading over, and we were going to be doing just two countries. We were doing Lithuania and Latvia this particular time. And the pastor in Lithuania organized it, and he organized the time in Latvia with this pastor friend of his there. So it was really kind of interesting. There's a picture here if you want to just take a quick peek at it. These are the two pastors from the one from Lithuania. Pastor Hector has his hand on his shoulder on the outside, and the one in the middle between Hector and I is the pastor from Latvia. It's Pastor Alexei and Pastor Gias, the two pastors there. And they both had a couple of, the largest churches in both of those countries. So it's a really interesting time. So the translation was hilarious because I was having to speak my meetings and translate for Hector's meetings. But it had to be translated from when Hector was speaking from Spanish to English, and then from English to the Lithuanian or Latvian, the Soviet language that they were using. And it was really quite interesting. But at least it was only three languages there. When we were in Poland, it went into 5 different languages all at once. That was quite a trip. By the time the last group were laughing at the joke, the first group were already onto a brand new subject. They couldn't figure out why the other ones were just laughing then. But anyways, we had some really interesting meetings in these countries. And in Latvia, we had a drive. I think it was about 3.5, 4 hour drive at night from Lithuania. We finished a meeting late at night and then took off for Latvia. Got there in the morning, had a chance to see a little bit of Latvia and get a bit of a rest and into the meeting for that night in Latvia. But in that first meeting in Latvia, it was really wonderful. God was speaking all day that day about he was wanting to heal people that had hearing problems that couldn't hear. And he actually gave a number of people that had not been able to hear since birth, as well as others that were totally deaf, as well as others that were partially deaf or deaf in one ear. And he gave numbers for both of them. And so I was speaking, and I said, okay, I am going to ask you to come forward when I call your thing when it comes to do with this hearing issues, because God's given some specific numbers, and I just want to check the numbers out. Okay? So I gave this word that God said he was going to be healing deaf ears, and then that there were, I can't remember the numbers, I'm sorry, but there was a certain number that was this and that, etc. And I gave the different numbers along the way. And as their group was called, they came forward. And, as often as I have seen God do things, as often as I've seen him come up with numbers, and the numbers have just been so precise and exact, I stand in awe every time I see him do it. And at one point, all the people that were totally deaf since birth came forward. All the ones that were totally deaf at the time came forward. All the ones that were totally deaf in one ear came forward, and all the ones that just had partial hearing, except one. And it was missing one person. And I said, look, God has been so specific. Look at here. You've got this group of this number. You've got this group of this number. You've got this group right here of this number. We're missing one. Who's not come forward? And finally, this little old lady came forward. And she didn't have her hearing aids turned up, so she didn't hear what the word was. And so she comes forward and she says, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. My I think she said grandson. My grandson told me to turn my hearing aid up. And then she could hear. But of all those ones that came forward, every single one of them received their hearings. The ones that had never heard before, you could see their eyes just bugging because they didn't know what was going on. They were hearing all this noise. And the ones that, there was some that were going like this, that had hearing in one ear and not the other, and realized they were hearing in both ears. So it was really fun watching. That was in Latvia. And then we went back to finish our meetings in Lithuania. We drove back to Lithuania and had some more meetings there to finish up. And as we were finishing up the last meeting in Lithuania, the Lord gave me a very specific word for the pastor. And it was a very private word, so I didn't give it over the microphone, but I asked the pastor to come forward, and I talked to him without the microphone in my hand or face, and explained the situation. And it was exactly a situation that he was going through with one of his church elders. And this church elder was trying to get rid of him, get him out of the church. Didn't like a couple of his political views, political church views. And it ended up so amazing what God did. And he did such a healing in that church that the church, although it was already pretty much the largest church in the country, it doubled in size. Once all of the strife and dissension were lifted, the church doubled in size. And the pastor, the elder, that was causing all the trouble, didn't leave. He didn't have to leave. God did a complete restoration in their lives. It was amazing. The next trip, it was very interesting. We flew in via Lithuania into Belarus. And flew into Belarus on Lithuanian Airlines. The next picture you can see, that's Lithuanian Airlines. It was a little plane, and it was cold, really cold. As you can see, the snow's coming down. I got this huge jacket on, all fur-lined and everything else, and the plane was not properly heated. But we got there. We got to Belarus and had a bunch of meetings in Belarus. Found out we went to this one marketplace. It was a place that had a bunch of traditional little Russian-type souvenirs. The little dolls that you got one inside the other and a whole pile of them. And I was getting several gifts for friends, and so it was fine. But in the market, I walked up to this one place, and I was looking for something specific. And I asked the person if they spoke English. And the guy looks at me. He wasn't too sure what I was doing, because apparently a lot of these sellers at their stands were not legal. They weren't supposed to be there. So I think he was trying to see if I was trying to trip him up on something. But anyways, I asked him this question, and he finally answered me. He says, yes, I speak English. And then the Lord said, tell him to make things right with his paperwork, and God would honor and bless his business. Would honor and bless his business to the point that he would have more customers every weekend when he's there than he usually had in an entire month. Well, he went in the next day, got his paperwork all straightened out, and it wasn't that he was, an illegal alien or something. He just never wanted to spend the money and never took the time. But God blessed him that weekend and gave him extra money, that more than he usually had. And he went in and got the paperwork done and came to the church that night with his papers in hand and showed it to me. And then, the end of our time there, I think it was the third weekend that we were there. We were there 3 weekends, and he came up and he said, I want you to know, I've already almost doubled what I make. Almost doubled what I make in a month, and we're not even at a full month yet. And he was absolutely ecstatic. So thankful that he listened to what God was saying. But then, from Belarus, we were flying, and this particular trip was my second trip to Belarus. We were flying to the Ukraine. And Pastor Hector was there, and Carla, his wife, were there with me on that trip, going from Belarus to the Ukraine. And the way it worked with Ukraine, you worked out that your visa was all done. Visa work was all done, and you were to pick it up at the airport when you arrived. So that's fine. We're at the airport, and we're on the plane getting ready, taking off. We're actually taking off for the Ukraine, and the captain comes on and says there's been a problem at the Borispol airport, which is the main airport in Kiev, and so we're going to have to land at this airport, which was the domestic airport. We didn't think anything of it, didn't mean anything to us, and so we get there, and these big guys with big guns came on, they're pointing down the aisles at everybody, wanting to see our passports, and looks at all our passports, and then he comes back on. He lets everybody off the plane except for Hector and Carla and myself and one other gentleman from Switzerland. And he wants to know where our visas are. And I told him, well, we were told that we were to pick up our visas when we arrived in the airport and that it was all organized. He says, yes, but that's at the international airport at Borispol. You are here, you're not at Borispol. I said, well, we're on the flight that we were booked to be on that was taking us to Borispol, and something happened and it changed on the way, and so now we're here. Now what do we do? And he goes off and he comes back in, and by this time the pastor had found out that we were landing in a different airport, and so he had rushed over there to meet us there, and he's telling them that our visas were at Borispol waiting for us, that it was all done, they were all taken care of, and they called over, but because we landed in the other airport, they weren't gonna give us our visas. So the next thing you know, we're still sitting on the plane. They wouldn't let us off the plane. Now remember, you're many degrees below zero, freezing cold. The heater in the plane wasn't working to start with. I mean, for the windows, you had to have the co-pilot was there scraping the ice off the inside of the window just so the pilot could see where he was going. And the toilets on this plane, it was a little tiny plane, it was only like about 12 passengers, and the toilet was a metal seat over this hole. And it's freezing, absolutely freezing. And if you've got to use that bathroom, realizing you've got a absolutely frozen bath toilet seat, if you sit on that, you're going to be sticking to it. So anyhow, the guy comes back on the plane, hands us our passports, and we were all excited. We thought he was going to let us go. No, he takes us up to the front door of the plane, on the front part by where the pilot's cockpit and that is, and he's big rack of luggage, and he's wanting us to point out what our luggage is. So we all pointed out our luggage, and I'm translating for Hector and Carla, and the guy from Switzerland as well. He didn't understand a word, and so translating, and we're all pointing out our luggage, all excited, thinking that we're going to get our luggage and they're letting us go. No, told us to sit down, and they were throwing our luggage back on the plane and sending us back to Belarus. Now we had another problem. We didn't have another visa for Belarus. Our visa for Belarus expired when we left the country. It was only a single entry visa. So the pastor in the Ukraine's calling the pastor in Belarus, telling him to get out to the airport with other visa paper because we're on our way back. So we got back to Belarus, and we were going in to the Ukrainian embassy the next morning, first thing, to work out the visa situation. And it was kind of awkward because they're wondering, well, why didn't you have visas? And so we told them exactly what we had been told and what the pastor in the Ukraine had worked out and told us, etc. And so then we had to go back that afternoon to pick up our visas. By the time we got our visas and got to the airport, the last flight to the Ukraine had already left. There was no more flights that day. Now, the meeting started that day. We were getting there a day early, so we'd have a bit of time to rest up and be there, because they had a huge, put the picture of the next picture up, Jerry, of the stadium. They had a huge arena that was booked for the meetings. I mean, it was huge. If you look at the next picture with all the people on the inside, okay, well, all those people, the place was packed. But they were packed waiting for us to get there. But we didn't have a flight. So the next thing you know, the pastor in Belarus arranged with a businessman of his that had all the paperwork he needed to go in and out for his vehicle as well. They had to have it for their car as well. And he was going to drive us from Belarus all the way to Kiev. That was a many-hour drive on incredibly snowy, cold roads. And again, the, the defrost wasn't working. And so we're sitting there defrosting, scraping the window again. And that was my job this trip because Carla and Hector were in the back and I was there in the front, scraping it all off. And then we get back to Belarus and they're there. And after a whole rigmarole trying to get visas, they let us back into Belarus. And and then we're heading off. Now we've got the visas for the Ukraine again. And the visa for the Belarus that they had given us was only going to be for that one day because we told them that's all we needed. One day. And so then we're heading back and now we're driving to the Ukraine. Freezing cold car, slippery, cold, icy roads with stops. Oh, they had security stops, several of them per mile. It was just crazy all the way along the road. Just taking later and later and later. We finally get there. Now remember, these people had been there for a meeting that started at 6 in the evening. We didn't get there till almost midnight. But they were still all there. Like that picture you saw, that was at almost midnight. And they were all still there worshiping God, waiting for us to arrive. So we got there, we got ushered straight out onto the platform, out of this cold, freezing car. Didn't even get to eat or anything else, and we did our first meeting. I mean, it amazed me how these people in the freezing cold, without heat, were sitting there waiting for us. 6 hours they waited. In our church, if the pastor or the speaker's 10, 15 minutes late, people are grumbling and complaining. Half an hour and they're gone. They're not waiting any longer than that. And but these people, they were there waiting, patiently waiting. Another trip to the Ukraine that Hector and Carla weren't on, there was a couple of ladies from my church in Canada, one who was totally blind. Totally blind. Came on this trip to the Ukraine. And from Kiev, we went down for a couple of days of meetings in Odessa, which is in the very southern part of the Ukraine, right on the Black Sea. So we're down there, and the pastor and his wife and his co-pastor and his wife, and they're taking us around on a tour of Odessa. You can see the picture of the pastor and his wife and with me there. There we are. That's the Black Sea in behind us. And it was really cold, but it was sunny anyway, so it wasn't as bad as it was up in Kiev. But then we were walking up some stairs to one of the sites they wanted us to see. And it was really very pretty. And we're getting up to the top of the stairs. And I wanted to sit down for a minute. I was pretty tired. And sitting there, a student came over and sat down beside me. And he said, "You're Pastor Rauna, aren't you? I was at your meeting last night." And he said, it really was encouraging watching those people come forward for prayer. And he said, "Do you remember the word that you gave that there was somebody there with a knee problem and they couldn't bend their knee properly?" He said, "Well, I was in the middle of leaving at that point." He said, "But that was me." And he said, "Look, I can't bend my knee." And he could straighten his leg out, not quite all the way, but he could not bend the knee down all the way. So he's trying to sit there on the stairs with his leg hanging down about 2 stairs because he couldn't bend it up. And he said, "Would you mind praying for me?" He said, do I have to come to the meeting tonight for you to pray for me, to wait for tonight for you to pray for me, or could you pray for me now? I said, "Oh, I'd gladly pray for you right here." So the pastor came over. He saw something was going on, and the blind no, it wasn't the blind lady, it was the other one. Anyways, they came over and they prayed with me for this gentleman. And we're praying for him right in the middle of a very busy tourist area. And the next thing you know, he's jumping up and down, gets up off the stair, bends his leg, and he's bending it back and forth, straightening it out, bending it and bending it back and forth. And there he was. God completely healed his knee right there in the midst of the tourist center of Odessa. Actually, if you go to the next picture, you can see there's the blind lady and this other one on the back row, on the opposite end from me, the little older lady, the second one in. Those are the two women that had come with me from my church. And they were having a wonderful time. The blind lady was the pianist at my church in Canada, and she did a lot of music there for us for the meetings. But then she was sharing this testimony. She shared a testimony with me several times that she used to get mad at me because she would talk, "Oh, I'm watching," or "I'm looking at." And I thought, now come on, Audrey, you're totally blind. What do you mean you're watching or you're looking at? Well, I was watching this TV show. You mean you were listening? No, no, I was watching. She was using visual, sighted person terminology. And then she was telling me how she was making these photo albums of all of the things that were going on in her life, from her piano recitals when she was a little girl all the way up and through to a concert that she did as the distribution of her first album that she recorded and all these things. And I said, "So Audrey, why are you looking at it that way?" She said, "Well, because that's how I'm gonna be. One of these days I'm gonna see those photo albums. One of these days I'm going to be seeing as I watch the television. One of these days." And she stood firmly that God is going to heal her. She's still standing on it today. That God is going to give her sight. She's not in a rush. When God chooses to do it, it's up to Him. It's His timing. But she didn't like being on a disability pension. She didn't like living that way. And she started taking all of these computer courses to learn how to use all these programs for the blind. And then she got a very good government job, working in a government department, a very good job, which most sighted people that have the possibility of having a disability pension don't even strive to do or don't even work to get. And she was not willing to sit there and just be on a disability pension the rest of her life. And she just retired in December from her years of service in this government agency. And she went on that trip as anybody else would on a mission trip. She didn't grumble or complain or "I can't see," or "you got to do this," or "you got to..." Not at all. She just went on that trip and did everything that she could. And then from Odessa, in one of the night meetings at night, a lady came forward. And in a lot of countries like that, they don't have a lot of money, a lot of currency. And so a lot of times for the offering, they will give you jewelry because that's what they've got. And all these couples, they come up and give their wedding rings into the offering and this type of thing. But this lady came up and she had a beautiful rose gold necklace. And she said to me, "I'd want you to have this." And I looked at her and she said, "Last night when you gave that word and you mentioned," and she listed 3 things that I had mentioned, she said, "That was me. And I prayed when you were praying for everybody. I prayed right with you, and I grabbed hold of that word because I believed God was going to do it." And she said, "This morning I had an appointment with my doctor, and the tumor that was exactly where you said it was, exactly, was gone. The doctor could not find that tumor." So we went back up the next day to Kiev and had some more meetings up there. And then another trip into the Ukraine. We were in Kiev again, and it was in a different hall, but it was so cold. Carla and Hector were on this trip with me, And it was so cold. Everything I had, every piece of clothing I had in my suitcase, I would wear all at once because it was so cold. The first night I went dressed in my regular speaking attire, and I thought I would never feel the tip of my nose again. It was frozen solid. So the next day I went in dressed a little more appropriately, and I had everything on. And I got to the point I would just change the outfit that was on the top. So I had couple of pairs of pants under, a couple of skirts, and a couple of tops, and a sweater, and a jacket, and my coat, and so I just changed what was on top, so it was different. And we were finishing the last meeting, and we were in a rush to get to the airport. We had to get on the flight. We were on our way up to Russia to go to Siberia. And so we're rushing, and the pastor was a little bit worried because they hadn't had time to straighten out the offering for us, and he wanted to take care of that. So we got taken to the airport by the gentleman that was accompanying us from the Ukraine to Siberia. And we get to the airport, and our luggage has already been sent off, and the pastor comes running up, and he has a paper bag in his hand, and he tosses, "Here you go, Rauna." And he tosses it over, except there's no room in my carry-on bag. There's no room in Hector's carry-on bag. The only place that had any room at all to put this bag was in Carla's carry-on. He says, "This is just your offering." Now, we'd already filled in these forms that the fellow from Siberia had helped us fill in because the forms were not in English or Spanish, and he gave us all what we had to fill in. But we didn't know it was asking if you had any jewelry or anything else, that you're claiming. And so now we're going through the security check at the airport, and they see this bag, and the lights are going off, and etc. And finally, they pull us aside, and the pastor says, not the pastor, the security guy at the airport, he says, "So what have you got in that bag?" That pulled it was Carla's bag, and so they pull her aside, and I said, "She doesn't speak any English, and this is our Russian translator, but he doesn't speak any Spanish, so you're stuck with me." And so they open it and find this bag, and it was absolutely full of jewelry from the offering. I mean, wedding rings and other rings and earrings and bracelets and necklaces and you name it. And so I said, "To be honest, I don't know what's in it." The pastor just handed it to me as we were getting ready to come through, and because he was late getting there. And the guy saying, "Okay, you're going to hold us and take us," he was calling the airport police and everything else. And then the guy from Siberia is talking to them. He said, "Look, you've got to let these two go." He said it wasn't in their bag. It was in her, throwing Carla under the bus. It was in her bag, and they have got to go because if they don't get on this flight, they're not going to be able to get the connecting flight to Siberia, and there won't be one for 3 more days. And by that point, the meetings will be completely over that they're going for. So he let Hector and I go, and we got on the plane, not knowing what was going on with Carla. And there she was. Carla was very young at the time, and there she was together with the Russian translator. She couldn't speak Russian, he couldn't speak Spanish, and they were there. And the next thing you know, we're on the runway getting ready to take off, and the captain stops. He says, "We've got a short delay here, and there's a police car coming roaring up to the plane." And we thought, "Oh no, are they coming to take us?" And instead, they let down the stairs, and out walks Carla from the police car and up onto the plane, and we got to take off. So we took off we landed in Moscow, and then we had to transfer immediately for a flight to Siberia. And this next picture, you can see it's pretty cold, the snow and the buildings, etc. And the very next picture is right there in front of that building, which is on the same plaza, just the far end of it, that God did another miracle right there. And it was a financial miracle. There was a lady whose purse was stolen by a guy running by, and the guy ran right by me, and, and I stuck my leg out and tripped him. And he looks at me, and he gets up to run again, and by this time, the police had caught up and nabbed him, and the lady got her purse back. She was a tourist that was there visiting. This was a very common place for pickpockets, apparently. and she was there visiting, and didn't all her money and her passport and everything were in that purse. So here I am tripping this guy, great tourist I am, and but God did that miracle. That lady got her purse back without losing anything, not a penny, not a passport, not an ID, nothing. And it was just incredible watching. But in that meeting, again, one miracle after the other that took place. That trip was absolutely full of them. And there was a couple that were struggling, and they came forward and asked for prayer. And they were quite a well-off couple, and they gave her engagement ring as an offering. And Hector's mom was having a major birthday. I think it was her 80th birthday or something like that anyways. And he was going to take the ring and give it to her for her birthday. And one after the other, people came to know the Lord in that meeting. So many people in that entire trip, in those trips into Russia and the ex-Soviet, came to know the Lord. It was wonderful watching as people, they'd see the miracles that God would do, and they'd want to know why it was happening and how they could have a relationship with Jesus where those type of things could happen in their lives. And it was just so encouraging watching it as God stepped forward and did everything in perfect timing. And there's a song that I'm going to ask Jerry to sing with here called I Will Look to Jesus. And in every one of those countries, in every one of those situations, it took looking to Jesus, allowing him to lead and guide every step along the way. And the miracles that he did were so exciting and so encouraging, but are meant for each and every one of us today, wherever we are. We don't have to be off in Russia or the ex-Soviet countries. You can be right where you are at today, in your city, in your town, in your country, in your church, in your workplace, wherever, and watch God work as you yield to him. Go ahead, Jerry. I will look to Jesus.
Whichever way the world goes, whichever way the wind blows, I will look to Jesus and follow where he leads. Though storms may rage around me and wars compass surround me, I will look to Jesus and follow where he leads. He sees beyond the present to a future resplendent, a day with no more sorrow when all tears are wiped away. Though torments have assailed me, his love has never failed me. So I will follow Jesus till my dying day. Whichever way the world goes, whichever way the wind blows, I will look to Jesus and follow where he leads. Though storms may rage around me and wars compass surround me, I will look to Jesus and follow where he leads. Now I can trust no other, no sister and no brother, my father or my mother, unless they follow him, much less some politician, a preacher or musician, no actor or physician, unless they follow him. Whichever way the world goes, whichever way the wind blows. I will look to Jesus and follow where he leads. Though storms may rage around me and wars compass surround me, I will look to Jesus and follow where he leads. Yes, I will look to Jesus and follow where he leads.
I love that song. It's sort of become a prayer of mine. I will look to Jesus and follow where he leads. And believe me, when you pray a prayer like that, he leads some of the most unusual, exciting places, but it's worth every step of it. And I pray that that will become your heart's cry, whether it's leading you to another country, whether it's leading you to a specific place in your city, whether it's leading you to a person in a hospital, wherever. Just be willing to be led by Jesus. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much that you are willing to lead us and guide us as we are willing to take steps in obedience to all that you ask of us. Father, I ask that you will touch hearts, reach lives. In your precious name, amen. Well, God bless you. Thank you for joining us. And I do pray that it's been an inspiration for you to follow where he leads, to look to him, to believe him, and go in obedience. So if you've been blessed and would like to sow into this ministry, please do. Jerry will put the links up on the screen so you can know where to send and what to send, how to go about doing it. God bless you. We'll see you next week.